Thank you for joining today. Before we get started, I'd like to state that we have over 1,300 participants that have RSVP'd to join us for this call today. And as you know, over the last 12 months, technology has been tested. So therefore, in effort to preserve our bandwidth, we do ask that if you're joining from BMO, kindly log off the VPN and on your post-secure system and enjoy today's presentation off the server. And for those that have submitted questions in advance of today's discussion, I'm excited to say that many of those questions will be answered during today's discussion. And with that, I would like to welcome everyone to the third BMO Bold Conversations. This event series was created to have race-forward conversations that will enable us to uncover barriers that impact our diverse communities, our colleagues, and customers. It provides us with a platform to discuss topics that leads us towards creating a society with zero barriers to inclusion. Today's theme will be geared towards a reflective conversation regarding what has happened since the murder of George Floyd within our society and at BMO. From social unrest to impacts of the pandemic and highlighting key actions that we must continue to take to move us forward to a more inclusive society. With upcoming holidays like Juneteenth approaching this week and the celebration of Indigenous History and Pride Month, we know how important it is to reflect and take learnings from our past to propel us forward into a sustainable future of social and racial justice, equity, and inclusion. Conversations like this reminds us that there is more work to be done, and we must continue to prioritize this dialogue in order to drive meaningful action. I am pleased to introduce our esteemed group of BMO executives who together will take us through a candid conversation on what has happened since George Floyd. First, I would like to welcome Dave Casper, U.S. Chief Executive Officer, Daryl Hackett, President of U.S. Wealth Management, and Tracy Morris, U.S. Chief HR and Inclusion Officer. Following today's discussion, we will also be joined by BMO Financial Group's Chief Executive Officer, Daryl White, to share reflective remarks from today's conversation. And now I would like to turn it over to Daryl Hackett to get us started.
All right. Thank you, Felicia. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It was just over a year ago, May 25th, 2020, when the tragic death of George Floyd occurred. And as we all know, he was choked to death from a knee on the back of his neck for more than 8 minutes. Nearly a year later, the officer involved was tried and convicted of murder. And I know many people who watched the video probably thought it was a no-brainer that he would be convicted. But unfortunately, it's been more the exception versus the rule that violence against the Black community often goes unpunished. I am still struck today by the role the community played in making sure that justice was served, from the teenage young woman who bravely recorded the full incident, to the young man, the MMA fighter, that called the police on the police because he knew something just wasn't right. If it were not for modern technology today, things just like the camera phone that allow the world to witness such an event, I'm not sure that this event would have been noticed and definitely not punished. As bad of a visual as the Floyd murder was, tragic violence has not ended. In fact, almost 200 Black people have been killed by the police since the death of George Floyd. And in most of these cases, many of us would not recognize their names. But why is this time different in regards to George Floyd? For one, it got the world's attention. George Floyd's death happened very visually at a time when the world was somewhat on pause. Trapped by the pandemic, our life had become virtual, and we were able to slow down long enough to pay attention. For this one moment in time, George Floyd received the world's attention. This attention was followed by an outpouring of both rage and empathy, and it came in very unprecedented ways. One thing was clear: an incredible number of people wanted to help. They wanted to drive change. This included individuals, organizations, and corporations. I remember the conversations that we had here at BMO very vividly. Dave Casper, you were one of the first CEOs to publicly respond, and more than a handful of Chicago leaders reached out to me and complimented you and BMO for being a vocal proponent for positive change. So Dave, we can bring you into this conversation. What was it about this event that caused organizations to move into action when racial injustice has been problematic for so long?
Well, thanks, Daryl, and thanks, Felicia, for setting this up, and Tracy for joining, and for my boss, Daryl White, for joining as well. He was very interested in kind of hearing this story, and we're going to hear from Daryl. Pump in anytime you want, but I know you wanted to listen, and please join at the end. I'll tell you exactly what it was, Daryl Hackett. I remember reaching out to you after it happened, as I did, and many of us did to many of our Black colleagues. And you said something to me that I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't really thought through. And you were very clear. You said, and I think it was pretty much word for word, Dave, thanks for reaching out. You should know this happens all the time. This is not an isolated incident. And you know what? That struck me. And I think that struck BMO. And I give you and a lot of your colleagues credit for stepping out of what I think is a zone, Daryl, that you haven't stepped out in the past. You haven't had the reason to. And in a way, it kind of got everybody at BMO thinking about things that they hadn't thought about before, being aware of things that they should have but hadn't been aware of before. And when you said, hey, this happens all the time, and but for a camera and a cell phone, that struck a chord. And I think it struck a chord across America. I really do. I think people realized how much they didn't know about a part of our community that was right in front of us, certainly right in front of us in Chicago or many of the places we do business in the United States. So, you know, Daryl, it's kind of like a lot of things in life. You wish it never happened, but having it happen and having us see it in live television brings something to life. And what's more important is, while none of us knew George Floyd, people at BMO knew you, or they knew Tracy, or they knew Oscar Johnson, or Anne Marie Wright, and on and on and on. And that kind of brings it to life. And that's why I think we got so much good out of this in terms of where we go from here. So back to you. Well, actually, when I think about it, maybe I should throw it back to Tracy for her comments as well. And I'd kind of like to know what both of you guys think about just, how do you think the corporate reaction has been?
I can start, Dave. The murder of George Floyd was a reckoning for American businesses. The more had to be done to fight systemic racism. The protests that were carried on across the world, so not only here in the US, but across the world in solidarity happened. And I was proud to see that. I agree that, like Daryl told you, that it happens all the time, but it was different this time because we had more people who showed allyship with us, and that really meant a lot. So some of the investments that corporate leaders made was fighting for racial inequity, supporting minority businesses, lobbying for police reform, providing opportunities for Black Americans. And the way I feel about it is really that because this has been driven by the CEO level, that's what's making us see some progress in where we're going, because it's been driven by the C-suite level and it has a focus now. And with that focus, we're seeing some change. We're still in the beginning phases of it, but we know that what gets measured gets done. And because it's being measured, there's a focus on it, we're seeing some movement. And so that's great. And out of this initiative, out of this murder, this tragedy that happened, we have our Black and Latino Advisory Council, which I'm very fortunate that we have because we are putting a lens on it. We have our Zero Barriers to Inclusion. So year over year, we're looking at our numbers and we're making some sustainable changes in that. We made a bold commitment to the Equal Justice Initiative, which was phenomenal for us, and the NAACP Justice Fund. So we did come out and we did make some changes, but that's because we have a leadership team that's involved in making those changes. So Daryl, what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Look, I'll add to that. I think, let's talk about corporates at first. It's really clear that corporates play a role in pushing us forward. And you've heard a lot of organizations talking about for purpose, which we talk about all the time, to boldly grow the good in business and in life. But the conversation, the dialogue was catering to more than shareholders and clients in the community. So it is about doing more. And I think that a lot of corporations realize that not only that they could play a role, but that it was necessary in order to push society forward. And I think that drove a lot of the response. For us, again, remember these conversations very vividly. Dave being out in front, Daryl White as well. We wanted to do more than the important CEO messages, public messages, writing the checks to some very important and deserving organizations and setting up the councils, which we did. We wanted to make sure that it was sustainable. And I know we'll talk about this a bit more, but that's the push and the drive that I think that we had. It was really about making a sustainable difference and an impact that we were going for. And being here, having this conversation, which none of us wanted to have, but being here, doing this with colleagues here at BMO, it gives you a lot of faith in the world, and believing in what is right can sometimes happen.
Thanks, Cyril, for that. I was thinking as we move forward, we had the Black Lives Matter protest, and we had some riots, and we had some impacts to our businesses. What is your point of view as we move to this next phase on Black Lives Matter, the protests, the riots, and the impact to our businesses?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. So my first thought is words really matter. And it was always interesting to me when we use the term protest versus riot, because they're very different. And some rioting definitely took place. And I don't think any of us support any acts of violence. But protesting is actually very important. Throughout our history, the act of peaceful protest has been the force for meaningful change. And it's the only way that society changes and is pushed forward. It doesn't just happen. But yes, there was some rioting that actually happened, and there was property destruction. And we experienced that ourselves right in Minneapolis, in the heart of everything that was going on. We have a branch on Lake Street that was damaged during the aftermath.
Right.
A choice to make in terms of how we're going to go about it. So obviously we put plywood there. We also put plywood up in Maine location and then many of our other locations. But our messaging was important as well. Plywood could be viewed by the community as separating us from them.
Mm.
You know, knowing this, we thought long and hard about it, and we actually used it as an opportunity to partner with local organizations that had Black youth focused on art, and we turned the plywood into art. We did this in Minneapolis at the Lake Street location. We also did this in Maine. And this allowed us to turn what was an unsightly piece of wood into real art and messages from the community. And it gave the youth of the community an opportunity to lift their voice and constructively participate in both uplifting the community, but also adding their voice to the need for society to overall to positively change. So it felt good to support that level of dialogue. But again, I think peaceful protest is necessary, and it's necessary that we listen to our communities.
Thank you, Daryl. That's good to distinguish between a riot and a protest because, that's an important words do matter. Dave, I was thinking as a white CEO, what do you think your role is into bringing clarity to this issue? How do you see your role?
Well, that's a great question. As a white CEO, or I guess as any CEO, some things would be the same, but specifically as a white male CEO, Tracy, you kind of hit on something. I think the most important thing is to be honest in your feelings, to acknowledge, and I'll acknowledge it here. Growing up, I didn't. This I'm sure will come as no surprise. I didn't have the experiences that my Black colleagues had. I never really felt discrimination. I never had the feeling that people, when I was not, right there, that they might be talking about me, might be saying something that was derogatory about me based on the color of my skin. I didn't grow up with that. And I think you have to carry that through. You have to kind of acknowledge that all of us had different experiences. And as a CEO, I think you have to, number one, you have to bring to your group of people that you use as counselors and people you bounce things off, you have to bring a really diverse group. Not all white, not all Asian, not all Black, not all Latin, a really good mix. And only then can you really get everybody around that table talking about the things that they have experienced. And it's not necessarily, there's a lot of reasons to do that, but to bring it to BMO, it's going to make us a better bank. And when you have a white male CEO, if that is the image of the whole bank, that's not the image we want to present. We want to present an image of a real thoughtful group of good advisors that will bring the best solutions to the clients, bring the best people to the clients, a diverse group. And you got to really push on that all the time. And I think, my success, whatever success I've had, has always been in the people that I've brought in, generally smarter than me, and letting them run their business, but only if they run it together. So we all kind of work together to get the best of all groups. And this group that I'm looking at is a pretty good example of that. But I think that's what you need to do. Be genuine, be honest. Don't act like all of these injustices happen to you, because I'll never know. But at least I can at least try to understand a little bit better and make sure that everyone feels the same way.
Thanks for saying that, Dave. As you think about not just the unfortunate George Floyd incident, but the pandemic itself, do you think that the pandemic amplified the awareness of the issues that have, not only that we've discussed, but that have plagued diverse communities for years? Because as we think about the pandemic and the way it's disproportionately impacted diverse communities, we've talked about the data here, specifically Black and Latino, BIPOC communities. We come to think about economic and health disparities a little differently, maybe. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Daryl. And it's, again, it kind of goes back to what we all saw. But why I feel so good about this is, in essence, what we did at BMO. And it was absolutely a grassroots effort. And it started, and I give credit to a couple of years ago when Daryl, the other Daryl, basically pushed us around purpose and got us to a point where very clearly we said what our purpose is: to boldly grow the good in business and life. And taking that purpose and having this event take place kind of mushroomed some great work that we did. I give Eric Smith, our vice chair, and Anthony Hudson, and a whole bunch of other people, but both of those just grabbing on to this issue and taking it to exactly where you said, where can we do the most good, and in our communities. And out of that came BMO Empower, which is not just a Chicago initiative or a Milwaukee initiative or an Atlanta initiative. It's a BMO initiative to empower all of us to give so much back in 5 billion in 5 years across all the businesses that we do, from employee giving to hiring to what we're doing in the communities to provide more housing, how we're going to get more Black and Latinx clients into our businesses, a much more diverse clientele, where we've done very well in the past, but we haven't really capitalized on that to tell everyone what we're doing and to bring more smaller businesses into the BMO fold. And Daryl, you touched on something also. You cannot walk down the streets in Toronto or Chicago or anywhere, particularly in the urban areas where there's lots of large office buildings, and not see the devastation that the pandemic caused. All of the small businesses that are closed up, from the shoe shine person to the dry cleaner to the coffee person selling the coffee or the candy or the condiments, the hot dog stands, they're gone and they need to come back. And that's part of what we see as part of our role and a part of our responsibility. Not only bringing people back when it's safe, but supporting those businesses through some of the great things that Neve is doing in our small business world, all the way up through to what Anthony and Eric are doing. It's a real awakening and a recognition that we have a lot to do and a lot to contribute, and so are other businesses. And that's why I feel that we'll get back. The PPP program that we had was fantastic, and it was for all the banks, but there's still more to do. This is not something that's going to, be fixed in 3 weeks.
Dave, I'm glad you brought up BMO Empower. It is something that I am, and I know many of us are incredibly proud of. We know we've been making an impact, and that's through the communities, it's through clients. But for us to push together and say we need to do more, committing to $5 billion of impact over the next 5 years, it also made a great statement. On the issues related to health disparities in diverse communities, can you tell us a little bit more, Dave, about the BMO and Rush $10 million partnership, and what is your vision for what we are looking to solve with our partners at Rush?
Well, as some of you know, BMO has had a long-term relationship with Rush Institution. It's spanned many decades. Bill Down has been on the board. Frank Teacher has been on the board. I'm proud to say that Daryl Hackett is now on the board. We've had directors on the board, and it's been a great relationship. And we made a large contribution through Diane Watton's group, and not probably 6 or 7 years ago. As that turned out, and with the reflection of what we saw with the pandemic, we recognized that one of the areas that we hadn't focused on enough was just health equity. So the Rush BMO Health Equity Institute is a way for us to give back through our great partner with Rush, to really try to close the gap, just as we have with United Way, close the gap on something that is so disparate, that can take the form of what zip code you're in, what kind of life expectancy you would have, or what, as we said during our conversations, where you stop on the L may have a difference of 10, 15 years in your life expectancy. It was clear that many people in the South, the West Side of Chicago, but frankly, across the country, were not getting the type of healthcare, we're not getting the access to the healthcare, which caused much of the disparity in terms of the outcomes with COVID. So we've contributed $10 million to that effort. I think it's certainly the only institute of this type in the Midwest, and one of the few in the country. And our hope, Daryl, is to lead the way. We can't do it all ourselves, nor can Rush. We're going to need other companies to step up to address this problem. But I think we've helped raise awareness for this. And I think through their efforts and some of the things that they're already doing, we're going to tackle this. And we're not going to see the type of disparity going forward in terms of health outcomes that we have in the past. So I'm really excited about it. I think it's just another way also where hopefully BMO employees can be proud of what we've done, what they've done to make things better. and to grow the good in business and in life. So from my standpoint, Daryl, I'd throw it back at you. We know this pandemic has had some pretty tough times in a whole bunch of areas. Talk about the Asian community and what are we doing there to step up our efforts?
Yeah, no, first just a comment on Rush as well. Very proud to be joining that board and working with both Rush and BMO. It's actually where both of my kids were born. So, I have a connection there as well. In terms of, Dave, the question in regards to the impact on the Asian community, first of all, I think everybody sees me out in front for many of the topics with the Black community. I'm also half Filipino. My mother's from the Philippines. So I experience all types of things in terms of my life, but in terms of the Asian experience, I see that probably more through the eyes of my mother. But what I think it says is that racial injustice is a very complicated topic, and every group has experienced it a bit differently. But when you peel back the onion, each group has a very long history that frankly, most of us don't really know and understand until we put a little bit extra time into it. It's the stuff that's typically not taught in school. But we've obviously spent a lot of time in this moment focused on the Black community and frankly, the impact of 400 years of slavery and the impact that it's had on the differences in the wealth gap, and then obviously in the Latinx communities as well. But when we started to see violence taking place in the Asian community, it was important that we also lifted our voice there. We knew very directly that our colleagues here at the bank, but also just throughout North America, were unjustly being exposed to something that just wasn't aligned with our purpose and our principles. So again, it's important for us to rally here and make sure that we're thinking about this topic broadly, and we can go down the list. We can think about other groups, Indigenous in Canada. And for those of you that are interested, we are actually just we've made some content and history available for those that are interested in learning about the Indigenous history in Canada. We're going to be doing the same with the Black experience. But every group is a bit different. So I think it was important that we paused and had great conversations there, working with, in the US, Henry Munoz and all of our colleagues in ACE, Victor Tung in Canada, and all of our colleagues there as well. But it's important that their voice was heard. And I thank them the same way that, Dave, you thanked me in the beginning in regards to speaking per their situation and how they were feeling. So maybe with that, as we're talking about other groups, I'm going to bring Tracy back into this, because we recognize that women in the workplace have also been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. So Tracy, can you maybe walk us through what some of these issues are, and do you see those issues happening here at BMO?
Thank you, Daryl. A year into the pandemic, and I see the pandemic has disproportionately impacted women. Women hold the majority of the service sector jobs. We have never seen a recession where women have lost more jobs than men. We have some women who are working, who are home with their children. They're the child care provider, they're the cook, the referee, the elder care provider. And some women are definitely facing some hardships that way. We have our essential workers who have to come into the workplace, and they have to be concerned about childcare. I have to be worried about their own health and safety as well. So I do see that. But what's missing from this story is transgender women. Transgender women have started this pandemic with economic issues, employment discrimination, and mental health issues. In 2020, that was the the year's worst year. That was the worst year for transgender women in American history. So more women who are transgender died in 2020, more so than any other year. And a lot of those women are people of color. We have a high amount in 2020 of child abuse cases, a high number of domestic battery cases. So as we come out of the pandemic, the strains are still there. So just because the stressors end doesn't mean that the trauma evaporates. The trauma is still here. So we have partnerships with great organizations like Women Employed and Moms Projects to help women as they transition back into the workplace. But what's so important, Daryl, is mental health. Mental health for women as they come into the workplace is so important. And we did have some mental health providers help our employees over the pandemic, as well as health providers. And I would say that we had record numbers of people who attended those sessions, because it's so important as you come into the workplace that you're here, and you can't be here with a lot of trauma at home. So we still have to deal with the trauma. So in 2020, that was really a hard year, and it continues to be for women, particularly some women who are the primary caregivers in their homes.
Thanks, Tracy. I appreciate that overview. Since you joined us as our U.S. Chief HR Officer, and then you also quickly pivoted into our Chief Inclusion Officer role. So you see it all. Can you talk a bit more about how you believe we've shown up, not just for women in the Black and Latino community, but across the board as we look at all of the groups that we think about and the ERGs that we have today?
That's great. BMO has really shown up in remarkable ways. So for me personally, being from the South Side of Chicago and family on the West Side of Chicago, the $10 million donation to underserved areas really meant a lot to me personally, and for a lot of women who benefited from that. And so BMO's commitment for $10 million really meant a lot. And that's a great way to show up. Our partnerships with non-for-profits in providing employment to women who are looking for opportunities, BMO has shown up. The listening sessions, because these are hard topics to bring into the workplace, but having empathy and listening has really been remarkable. Providing also an opportunity with our ERGs for women and providing flexibility in the workplace, because not everyone can work 9 to 5. So being open to flexibility has really been important for the women in our environment. And that has happened at BMO. And so I really value that. Also, we have our career development programs where women get mentorships and they get support from our leaders so they can advance in their careers. As you know, Daryl, you're on our BLAC, the Black Latino Advisory Council, who also looks to provide more opportunities for our Brown employees, our Latinx, as well as our Black employees. So BMO has shown up in major ways by financial contributions, making more opportunities, sponsorships, mentorships, and providing flexibility so that mothers can come to work and they can get their mental health needs addressed as well. So I appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to Dave, though. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. So Dave, for you, in your senior leadership role and a guy who has done a lot for our communities and given a lot of great donations and definitely been a face for us, how have our leaders, in your opinion, shown up and made an impact to this cause?
I'd say it starts at the top, and Daryl convened early on, and Cam has done a great job along with Anne Marie and others in just pulling together what we're trying to do as a firm. And we all recognize that the issues across countries and across geographies are different in terms of the specific areas where diversity is lacking and what you need to do. But having a kind of a front-footed approach from the enterprise is where it starts. And I think we've had great leadership there. Now, I think what we try to do in the US, and by the way, Del Camargo, who's, I think if you don't know him, he runs all of our global products. Dell's been great in also making sure that people understand that these issues are not just in the US or not just in Canada, they're everywhere. So starting there and having our leaders talk about this in a, in an unrehearsed way really is good. And then taking it down. So we have at our performance committee that Daryl leads, we talk about these issues and what we can do. At our US management committee, Tracy, you and I and others have led that. We've really gotten people talking about what we can do to improve our representation, which, by the way, I just want to stop. If it sounds like we're all patting ourselves on the back, and I listen to it and I do hear all the good things, there's a lot of things we aren't doing as well as we can do, and we should all recognize that. And one of the areas is we need more representation in our senior ranks. It has to look more diverse, just as it does with our clients. So we tackled that. We've said, what can we do? And that's great outside hiring. It's fantastic retention, which we need to do. It's recognizing that we think we're pretty good and we ought to be able to retain and then attract other employees to make us more diverse, and then holding people accountable. And by the way, that hasn't been hard. Our leaders, I'll speak for, I'm very proud of our commercial team. They've embraced this at every level. Much better recruiting at the low levels, at the right out of college level. Much stronger retention and a much greater focus on how we take employees in that grade 7, grade 8, how we get them to the grade 9 and to the upper levels. And this is not something people are feeling, okay, I better do this, or Casper or White are going to be all over me. This is something they want to do, or worse, Morris and Malone. It's because they actually want to do it. And I think they all recognize it. And it's getting that partnerships going. And by the way, Felicia, doing these bold conversations and making sure that they are bold and holding us accountable, that we're answering the tough questions, not just the easy ones, and holding us all accountable. All of these things, I think, are the types of things we have to do from a leadership level to make us better. And I think we are. And the reason I feel that, I feel it, but I hear it from our employees at all levels that are kind of proud to be at BMO, and on occasion will say, you know what, I haven't seen this from some of our competitors in Canada or the US, or haven't seen at the level that we've demonstrated. Again, nobody should feel smug about this. There's a lot to do, but I really do think our leadership's embracing this and we're making really good progress. So,
Thanks.
Daryl.
Can I just jump in 1 minute, Dave, because you said a lot of important things. And as far as our goals that you talked about and our leaders and our hiring strategy, for our Ambition 2025 strategy, our zero barriers to inclusion, we have really put a focus year over year to look at our women hiring as well as our people of color hiring. So we do have a plan and a strategy of that. And leadership always starts from the top. So what I want to say for you is that you do a great job of making sure that we have our goals and that they're front and center, particularly at our U.S. Management Committee. Bringing leaders in to talk about their responses to issues that happens in the communities. As we talk about the Asian community and our response and standing in solidarity with the Asian community and allyship that way. That was also presented at the leadership level. So we truly have that on our radar. So no, we're not perfect at everything, but we're attempting to really bring these conversations, the bold conversations for our customers, colleagues, and communities. But we really want our employees here to know that it's important that we're having these conversations, because I'm going to tell you that 67% of new hires look for diversity strategies when they come to corporate America. And we have put out our zero barriers to inclusion strategy, and people look at that. They look at the area of development, but they want to make sure that we have a diversity strategy and that we're aiming towards something and we're moving in the right direction year over year. And I would say not everyone has been as bold. And so we do have a ways to go, but we are moving and we're on this journey together.
I didn't know that about 67%.
7%.
I guarantee it's that much on the client. Speak since I see my boss, it's 100% of my bosses that have that as their goal. So let me flip it back to Daryl Hackett. You know, Daryl, you've joined the BHB board. We talked about the Rush board. You're leading the or vice chair of the Black and Latino Advisory Council, which Tracy already mentioned. Tell us about how we're doing within those groups. How are we really making progress to get better outcomes? And how are you helping, and how's the team helping to pull that together so it's one big enterprise effort?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. First of all, I'll go back to the comments you made. Yeah, this isn't a pep rally to talk about all the good things that you know, what we've kind of skipped over is some of the harder conversations we had in terms of acknowledging and recognizing places where we had gaps, and things such as representation in the senior ranks, where you know we said let's stop just comparing ourselves to the industry and compare ourselves to more ambitious benchmarks and set goals to nearly double our representation. So I just say that first of all to say it's important that we acknowledge those opportunities. And as we get into the Black and Latino Advisory Council, you mentioned Dellen Tamanga, who's been a fantastic partner in Toronto, but also Herb Mazariegos, who has been also our co-chair and helping us push the dialogue forward. But when I think about the council, it's less about the three of us, and it's more about all of the people that anxiously agreed to participate and help us push it forward. And beyond the other senior leaders that have jumped in, really it's been the ERG leaders, the co-chairs of the Black Professional Network and Latino Alliance, people like Ivy Johnson and Joelle Malumbo and Janie Cervera, who have really helped us push things along and make sure that we have full perspective, not just about the things that we talk about amongst ourselves at the executive table, but a better feel for how our people are feeling across the bank and the business. So I think we're trying to do the right things, and it starts with effort and intention, and I think we get really high marks there. And now, as you know, what gets measured gets done. So we're having the ongoing conversations to make sure that it's not just effort, that we have the right outcomes along the way. So when I reflect on that, the work of the task forces, the work of all of our colleagues in HR and the different lines of business, I feel good about it. What we also acknowledged was, you know, we talked about recruiting earlier. We obviously want more diverse candidates. We want great candidates to come into BMO, but we spent some time thinking about how do we actually develop the folks that we have here to make sure that their aspirations are aligned with, you know, making that a real reality. So those are the things that we don't solve with a meeting or two or even in a year, but I think we're putting the right infrastructure and right effort in place to make sure that we are on a great path.
Okay, Daryl, I thank you for that, and I agree with what you said, and people have absolutely noticed this. So, Daryl and Tracy, I'm going to make a couple of very general comments, and then I'm going to turn it over to Daryl White, who has been listening, and asked him to maybe give us his views and an enterprise view. But a couple things before I do. Number one, and probably the most important, we can all get better at this, and that's everyone. That's not just white males, and that's not just African Americans. That's all of us really understanding, you know, from where we all came and what we're trying to do, and to bring it forward, you know, to make us better as a bank and make us better in our communities and with our clients. And I think it will. I think it's being noticed. I think we're at the front end of this. But as I said before, I don't want to lose track of this. And people do ask all the time, as they should. Okay, is this like the flavor of the month? Is this something that next year you'll be talking about something else? And frankly, and that's why I talked about our purpose before. I think having the purpose and then having what happened here couldn't have happened better. And from a timing standpoint, it makes us better. So a lot to do, but I think we're making really good progress. It's all about leadership. It's all about everyone on this call at whatever level, taking the time to not only put yourself in the other person's shoes, but then walk with them and try to make yourself better and the people you're working with. And what we've done, and I'll close with this, what I'm most proud about is I think we really have stepped up in our communities across all of our geographies. And that helps us just in so many ways. First, I mean, it really makes our employees proud of us. And it makes me proud. And I think it makes our communities realize that BMO is growing the good. And this is not unimportant. That's why we're all here. It makes our customers recognize that they're banking with a good bank. And it makes our prospects think that maybe their bank would be a little bit more like BMO, or hopefully maybe would become BMO. So it's all good. I want to thank Felicia again for pushing us to do this. And I think we'll have more of these. And with that, if it's okay, I'll turn it over to Daryl.
Well, Dave, thank you. I was reflecting as I was listening to all of you on the meaning of Juneteenth as we approach the celebration this year. And it's funny to think about it in some ways as a celebration, because of course, with all that it entails, it's designed to be celebratory. But this year, naturally, it just takes on so much more meaning. So I wanted to thank Felicia for convening the conversation, and Dave, you and Daryl and Tracy for leading it. I think this has been a pretty meaningful conversation that is really the pinnacle of all the conversations that are happening around the place and happening in society. So thank you for including me in it. A few thoughts from me. I think we can all agree that there's a lot deeper meaning this year. And when I think about it, as far as BMO is concerned, the events of the last year have really just challenged us effectively to figure out whether we can double down on our commitment to zero barriers. Because when we say zero barriers to inclusion, that can mean a lot of things. But you've talked about how our purpose and the pillars of our purpose, including zero barriers, get discussed in a lot of places. It's not just a sign that we post on the wall and then we look at it at the end of the year and say, how did we do? We actually talk about it almost every day in different places. And that's where, to me, it's organic, it comes to life. And Dave's right in saying we got a long way to go and we're far from perfect. But when I do think about the purpose that's driving our organization, and I'll give you one real live example. We realized we had a gap probably a year and a half or a couple of years ago when we said we measure a lot of things in the organization, but where you measure them and where you put accountability also matters. So we were looking at our diversity and inclusion targets, and they were absent in something that we call the performance committee of the bank. So we've got about 50 leaders who come to performance committee. And where performance isn't good, it can be an uncomfortable meeting, as you might imagine it should be. But we talk about market share, and we talk about NPS, and we talk about how we're doing on our financial metrics. And we said we have to talk about this as well. So there it is, right there on the scorecard with everything else. So we've got another mechanism under the banner of performance to talk about how we're doing. So to me, this conversation is about what's right for society and right for the world, but it's also about what's right for the performance of our bank. And they all do fit together. And while a long way to go, I think there's a lot of encouraging conversations going on. I want to thank Dave in particular for your sponsorship and your leadership around this conversation. Daryl and Tracy for as you've done so many times before, for galvanizing the conversations and making it real. Felicia, for curating everything that we've talked about, because I think as leaders, whether you're thinking about this from a societal perspective or a corporate perspective, BMO, at the end of the day, it's personal. At the end of the day, it's about what are we each doing in our companies, in boardrooms, the influence that we might have at City Hall, the influence that we have at our own dining room tables. That's where it all comes home. And so to catalyze conversations like this with so many tuning in, I think is just so important that we can keep that ball rolling. I'll close with this. It's a bit of a round trip to where I started. As we think about Juneteenth this year in particular, I think we think about it with a much broader perspective. I was encouraged to hear President Biden talk about how the government takes responsibility and accountability for driving a diverse outcome with more equality. And I think that's great, but I don't think it's enough. I think it's going to take all of us in all of those forums that I just talked about earlier to continue to drive it. And not just in the United States, but as Dave said earlier, it's a live conversation in Canada and outside of the North American borders. It's that important. So I want to thank all of you for bold conversations like this one. These are exactly the types of conversations that we need to make real progress against our purpose. So I want to thank you for including me and wish everybody a great rest of week.
Take a ticket and get